Do you struggle to understand why a just and all-powerful God could allow so much suffering and evil to pervade the world? Do you ever wonder if the institutions that govern this world exist not to serve us, but to control and even imprison us? Do you believe in a transcendent spiritual reality, one that lies beyond the veil of this material world? And do you engage in practices that give you first-hand knowledge of this higher reality? If your answer to these questions is yes, you might just be a modern Gnostic. Gnosticism is a word given to a constellation of beliefs and practices that existed in the first centuries after the time of Christ. The Gnostics saw the world very differently to the church fathers who formulated the doctrines of the Christian church, and that made them a target for suppression. By the 4th century AD, Gnosticism had mostly been eradicated. But today, Gnostic thought has returned. And in this episode of World Astrology Report, we're going to explore the return of the gnosis to the world. But we're going to have some help along the way, because I'm joined in this video by a very special guest who knows more than a little about how to navigate this Gnostic moment. He's the writer, podcaster, forecaster, healer, and magician, Rune Soups, Gordon White.
This can be easily and sillily dismissed as saying that, oh, everyone thinks they're living at the end of the world. Firstly, this isn't the end of the world. This is a fundamental update to reality. And two, sooner or later, somebody has to live through it. And as far as I can tell, that's us.
Together, we're going to consider what Gnosticism is, why it's returned at this particular moment in time, and what it can tell us about our modern technological predicament. So if that sounds good to you, then please settle in and join me, your host, Dan Waits, on another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. Gnosticism is a kind of umbrella term for a variety of sects and beliefs that thrived in the first centuries after the time of Jesus.
Gnosticism is a slippery category in many ways because it's a modern-ish academic term for a collection of different beliefs, basically the ones that were excluded from what became official Christianity in those first few centuries when different cults and different mystic traditions were thrashing it out and working out what was going on. So Christianity is most interesting to me when it's still that hot mess.
But what did the Gnostics believe? Well, among their core beliefs was the idea that because suffering and evil are so plainly evident in the world, the beings who run it may not be as good as they're cracked up to be by mainstream religions.
Gnosticism, as we know it today, has a bit more of a jaundiced and even suspicious view of the cosmos. So Gnosticism is the belief that the cosmos isn't created by the true God, but by a lesser entity known as the demiurge, who created this whole enchilada as, in most respects, a prison, some way of trapping mankind for his own purposes, to feed off energy, all that kind of stuff. And so in particular, we have this notion of the archons, which is a Greek word that essentially means boss. And when we look at it, perhaps from a more modern astrological perspective, what they're working with there or grappling with is this creation, this edifice that we're in, is governed. It has properties and it has beings that are in charge of certain things. And we kind of experience that as planets in astrology, which in a lot of Gnostic sects, they would have said the same thing. So that the planets themselves would have been archons, and they are part of a control mechanism that keeps us here because they govern things like our fate.
The Greek word gnosis means knowledge. So a Gnostic is a person who seeks salvation through knowledge. The idea underlying Gnosticism is that the material world is an evil and illusory one. And we human beings are really sparks of divinity trapped in this material prison, but we can escape by gaining first-hand knowledge of who we really are.
I used to joke that the 90s movie Dude, Where's My Car is the most Gnostic movie ever made, because it's this awareness of like, oh, I've just arrived here and I have the sense that what's going on or what's just happened is not actually what's playing out in front of me. And the Gnostic journey is that recovery of what truly happened.
Dude, where's my car? Where's your car, dude?
Gnosticism teaches that salvation can be obtained through practices that awaken us to the divinity within each of us. It urges us to look within, not without. This is very different to what Christianity eventually became, a doctrinaire faith that expected its adherents to obediently do as the church and its clergy commanded. Gnosticism is a Christianity that might have been, one that was ultimately suppressed by the agents of empire.
I think Gnosticism is slightly pre-Christian. I think it emerged initially as a profound Jewish dissatisfaction with the temple elite and their complicity with Rome. And so you have this growing understanding that what was promised to us by the priests, what was promised to us by God himself, is a lie. It's a lie that's complicit with imperial power. And that leads to very different approaches to mysticism and an understanding of the purpose of life, because we can expand that dissatisfaction out from an imperial province up through the stars and say, well, I'm stuck in this condition and it's as if where my Saturn is, and it's because this is what Mercury does. And so we have this idea that while we are human, we are subject to restrictions, and who or what is the cause of those restrictions.
You may think that Gnosticism sounds like a rather pessimistic faith. And indeed, that's been the charge its enemies have leveled at it since its early days. But it was pessimistic for a reason, because it reflected the political circumstances in the world when it emerged. At that time, a strong, technologically advanced, militaristic empire ruled the known world. So there are similarities between the time of the Gnostics and our current moment. And that might explain why the gnosis has returned. And it's arguably returned at a perilous moment when humanity needed it most. If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do click that like button and let the YouTube algorithm and me know that. And if you're keen to avoid missing future episodes, then hit the subscribe button and even enable notifications so YouTube alerts you when I drop a new video. And if you really enjoy what I do here, then there's something else you can do, which is sign up as a member of World Astrology Report at worldastrologyreport.com. But why would I do that, I hear you ask? Well, besides supporting my work, you'll get access to a growing library of exclusive content, because all of my episodes since I launched the members site have had exclusive members-only versions with juicy additional material. In these extended episodes, I go deeper into history and technique, so this option is perfect for those of you who are history lovers or astrology students. For example, in the extended version of this very episode, which you can watch right now on the site, we go into the history of the Cathars, a Gnostic sect that was suppressed violently by the church in the 13th and 14th centuries, and we look at the astrology underlying the construction of a digital control system, which a Gnostic might say is the work of the Archons today. And signing up also gives you access to the War Room, a private forum hosting a growing community of great astrologers and all-round interesting people who are discussing the things I talk about on this show and the astrology of the world as it happens. The good thing about a forum is that unlike here today, gone tomorrow social media, it's very easy to find old discussions on interesting topics and read and learn from them. In other words, in the War Room, we're building a library of knowledge that you can get access to. And last but not least, you'll also get access to regular live streams for War members. We've held 3 so far. They've been great fun, and you can watch them all in full on the website right now. You can sign up for a month and cancel at any time, or you can sign up for a year, which will save you 20% on membership. So there's always that. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. The period from 1945 to 1947 was possibly the most remarkable of the entire 20th century. In 1945, the full horror of the Holocaust was revealed, and the first nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the Second World War. This was perhaps the moment when humanity truly grew up. But something else happened at that time that could turn out to be just as consequential. In 1945, a farmer named Muhammad al-Saman found 13 leather-bound codices in a sealed jar buried near the town of Nag Hammadi in Egypt. The books contained 52 Gnostic texts, and collectively they're known today as the Nag Hammadi Library. These include several more Gospels beyond the 4 in the Christian Bible today, and various other texts detailing the beliefs and practices of the Gnostics. They're believed to have been hidden by monks from a nearby Christian monastery attempting to preserve heretical texts from destruction by church authorities in the 4th century. And then, soon after that, in 1947, another trove of ancient wisdom in the form of the Dead Sea Scrolls was found in the caves at Qumran in the West Bank on the shore of the Dead Sea. The scrolls were probably hidden by members of a devout Jewish sect known as the Essenes, which some scholars believe were the forerunners of the Gnostics. But like 1945, 1947 was also a hugely significant year in world history. It was the year of Roswell and the invention of the transistor, which enabled the development of the microprocessor and ultimately the internet. And it was the year that the Cold War began and the CIA was founded.
This is a Gnostic moment for nested reasons. The first one being, it strikes me as very unusual that we have or have been gifted this corpus of Gnostic texts in the mid-20th century, around the same time that we started using nuclear bombs and we started seeing UFOs in the sky and so on. And the great 20th century alternate archaeologist Jim Mars considered it an inflection point for humanity, this sort of 1946-ish area, Roswell, Kenneth Arnold, Dead Sea Scrolls. There is something to that moment. So, especially when you realize that these texts were lost for 1,200 years, 1,500 years. And for them to show up at this time, and certainly as we are staring at the precipice of another existential imperial moment now, when you're looking at a 1,500 year basketball throw, that's nothing but net from the car park. Like, these texts have showed up just at a time where we might need them. So on a magical level, it's a Gnostic moment because the text showed up just as we're in the throes of an Archonic apocalypse. That's one of them. The other, and it's the stirring that's happening in the global soul, I would say, but certainly in a quote unquote Western sense, that same stirring that occurred, I believe, amongst the people of Israel at the time of the Roman occupation, which is, oh, this is bad. How the world is run is not good, and how we were told it's run is not actually how it's run. So there is a Gnostic awareness and a profound Gnostic dissatisfaction with the structures of power that are going on at the moment, and that's tied into obviously various longer-term cycles that are playing out around us. But that's the other part of the Gnostic moment, the inner waking up, the movement almost from a official reality to a Gnostic reality is the soul's response to what's going on in the outer world.
And so, if you zoom out and view our moment in the context of the full panorama of human history, it seems clear that the period we're living through is a remarkable one perilous enough to demand the return of the gnosis.
I think about this moment in a very Kali Yuga sense. Famously, during the Kali Yuga, you need only recite Om Mani Padme Hum once to guarantee that at some stage, not in this lifetime, but during this epoch, that you will achieve enlightenment. And the reason for that is that the distance from the sacred is greatest at a time like the Kali Yuga. And actually, depending on what count you look at, we're not in a Kali Yuga now, but that sentiment, I think, is correct. So we have an abundance of spiritual wisdom around us. We have the Gnostic texts. We have access through automatic translation and all kinds of stuff to wisdom traditions around the planet in a way that humans either have never had before or haven't had for 150,000 years, missing civilizations, that sort of thing. So it is technically the best time in at least 150,000 years to be a mystic, but only technically, because the prevailing conditions are the least conducive to the soul's journey than they have been in centuries.
Multiple cyclical time systems from around the world are pointing to this period as one that will bring a huge shift in consciousness.
Does astrology work because the universe is cyclical, or is the universe cyclical because astrology works? And I think it's astrology works because the universe is cyclical. And that opens up the possibility of having other languages of prediction and interpretation and understanding in dialogue. If you look around the world, there are traditions of forecasting and traditions of prophecy that are pointing to this approximate 80 to 120 years, right? And again, just like the return of the Gnostic text, if you're measuring time in millennia or tens of millennia, that's a really, really tight orb, right? 120 years is quite a tight orb when you're dealing with, as the Mayans will, cycles of 64 million years and more, right? My home base for this as an idea is the Andean notion of the Pachacuti. So Pacha is space-time and Kuti is overturning. And it's a 500-year cycle that began not so much in the 40s, more in the 50s with an earthquake in Cusco that revealed the Coricancha, the sacred Inca temple at the heart of the whole Tawantinsuyu or Inca empire that was underneath, inevitably, a Jesuit structure. That was the liftoff point for the cosmos overturn. And the cosmos that's overturning is the one of the conquistadores. So the imperial model is coming to an end. And when the cosmos is overturned in an Andean context, reality itself is completely rearranged. So that's my view of the astrology at the moment. This can be easily and sillily dismissed as saying that, oh, everyone thinks they're living at the end of the world. Firstly, this isn't the end of the world. This is a fundamental update to reality. And two, sooner or later, somebody has to live through it. And as far as I can tell, that's us.
In Western astrology, the cycle that speaks to great shifts in faith and belief is the synodic cycle of Pluto and Neptune. These two planets conjoin every 500 years or so, and their cycle describes changes in our most fundamental beliefs about the world. Successive sets of these conjunctions shift forward in the zodiac a few degrees every half millennium. The last Pluto-Neptune cycle, before the current one, began with conjunctions in 1398 and 1399. They were the first conjunctions in the sign of Gemini after 2,500 years of conjunctions in Taurus. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the messenger, and the planet of trade, communication, and the rational, discerning mind. The 500-year cycle that began at that time saw the Protestant Reformation, the invention of the printing press, and mass literacy, and the triumph of materialist science and global capitalism, among other things. But that Pluto-Neptune cycle ended with fresh conjunctions in 1891 and 1892, a few degrees further into Gemini. By this time, the Catholic Church had been thoroughly disempowered, materialist science was in the ascendant, and Nietzsche had announced this shift with the statement that God is dead. But those conjunctions initiated a new 500-year cycle. Now, if we want to know what will come over the course of a synodic cycle, that's a cycle formed by the interaction of two planets with each other, we can look to the events that happen around the time of the conjunction. Synod means meeting. So conjunctions are moments when two planets meet and announce what they intend to bring into the world. And these announcements can be read and interpreted by those who know how to listen. Conjunctions are seed moments, and they show us the themes that the full cycle they initiate will concern. And so we have to ask, what happened at the time of those conjunctions, particularly as it relates to the theme of faith and belief? Well, at this time, an occult revival was in full swing, and a variety of magical and spiritual organizations emerged, including the Theosophical Society, founded in 1875. The founder of Theosophy, the Russian mystic Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, was very sympathetic to Gnostic ideas. She wrote extensively about them, and she incorporated many of them into her system of thought. And in 1890, a French esotericist named Jules Benoit Douanel Duval-Michel had a mystical experience in a chapel owned by an aristocratic friend of Blavatsky. In his vision, he was guided to found a new Gnostic church. And so he did. That year, he founded l'Église Gnostique, a church that adheres strictly to Gnostic principles. And Douanel ordained women in the Gnostic church, which was unheard of in mainstream Christianity and most other religions at the time. One of the core teachings in Gnosticism, which was partly erased from mainstream Christianity, was the vital role of Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, the divine feminine, and the soul of the world. And this is something that's pointed to in the leading role of women in the Theosophical Society. The next head of the society after Blavatsky was another woman, Annie Besant. If you look back in history, it's quite rare to see women heading religions and spiritual movements. Something in the world had changed.
I think you could make the case, I don't think this is the whole story, but you could make the case that the recovery or the surprise gifting from the cosmos of the Gnostic texts is the beginning of the return of the sacred feminine to the Western mind. So the idea that the divine feminine can be suppressed or excluded is profoundly pathological. And it is actually a deep motherly love that will see this being, despite our treatment of her, return again and again to provide that maternal motherly medicine. I am frankly bullish that this time she sticks around for good. In whatever form that looks like, I think Sophia is back for good. If you look at the story of women's suffrage over the 20th century, this looks like the return of a multifaceted divine feminine, not just mother, but warrior and apocalypse goddess, and all the things that are necessary aspects of a healthy, functioning human soul. So yeah, I think the story of the return of Sophia is the story of the return of this polyvalent sacred.
Now, at this point in the extended version of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, we look at how a certain traditional astrological technique reveals hidden parallels between our current era and the time of Christ and the Gnostics. But what you need to know is this: the current Pluto-Neptune cycle, which we're around 130 years into by this point, will see the return of Gnosticism. We saw it in the events around the time of the conjunctions. And if we look around us today, we see that Gnostic thinking is everywhere. Gnosticism preaches practices that awaken us to the divine spark within ourselves. Many Gnostics also believed in reincarnation, that we're reborn continually into the fallen world of the demiurge, and only gnosis can set us free from this cycle. And these kinds of beliefs are very common today. Countless modern people describe themselves as, quote, spiritual but not religious. What this tends to mean is that they believe in a realm of spirit and often in reincarnation, and they often engage in practices conducive to getting in touch with higher realities, whether it's meditation, yoga, or forms of magic. The prevalence of these trends owes a lot to the occult revival of the late 19th century, to the Theosophical Society in particular. People generally pour scorn on woolly New Age beliefs, but they make more sense if we see them as the start of something, not the end result.
My model for the recovery of spirit, let's say, is more biological, more of a gardener. So if you destroy your backyard with Roundup, it's too many weeds, or you need to get rid of the lawn because you're going to put something else in. The first grow in damaged and degraded soil are what we call weeds, but in permaculture is called recovery species. So these are the species that will do things like bring nutrients up from deeper in the soil to closer to the surface, where they can begin to interact with water and microbes to begin building the soil again. You have weeds that are ground covers to make sure it doesn't blow away, and so on. So whenever we damage soil, the cosmos, nature, has a process of recovery that begins with plants that don't look like, dare I say, they belong, or that they aren't the culmination species. And that's how I view, basically from the late 1700s on, from the absolute king hit of materialism, which in a Ian McGilchrist way may have been necessary to unseat what Fouque would have said was the dominant of explanation, which is the religious view, not of inquiry, but of just being told this is how reality is. And so materialism emerged with a king hit against something that probably needed at least a bloodied nose, which is revealed religion. And I think over the next 150 years, you start to see, because it is a fundamental reality of the cosmos, that it is alive and sacred, the recovery of that understanding in the quote-unquote Western imagination. It's funny, we consider the New Age to be kind of new, but if you look at its core components, many of them are 19th century. I think it is a good example of how the return of the sacred and the ontological interregnum starts to happen. And much of it is silly, but that's again coming back to this recovery species idea that these weeds, these sacred weeds, have to grow through consumerism and have to grow through a world of Walmart and TikTok and just really unpleasant stuff. So as the sacred grows through that, you get, I don't know, Lululemon retreats in Costa Rica. And, you know, in 300 years' time, we'll look back and go, yeah, I see where that went. I see what that did to the soil so that something else could grow next.
Gnostic ideas are also expressed in modernity in other forms. Psychoanalysis, a therapeutic practice asking us to look within to the answers to our problems, is one of them. And yet again, it dates back to the period around the Pluto-Neptune conjunctions of 1891 and 1892. Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in 1899. And another key figure who came of age around that time was the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung.
Jung, I think, is the sort of wizard that shows up once every 1,000 years. I think he was a genius that is bigger than most humans. And he did something really, really remarkable, which is essentially return the spirit world to people that pretended it wasn't there. And he also managed to, I think, fundamentally change psychology in 2 different centuries. And in this one, he's dead, and he still managed to do it with the publication of the Red Book. So he changed it in the 20th century when he was alive, and then dead in the 21st century with his Red Book. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And depth psychology is not just a powerful mental health modality. The existence of depth psychology transformed and electrified every single Western spiritual tradition in the second half of the 20th century. So that's why he was one of the great wizards of the last millennium, because he didn't even intend to transform neo-paganism, astrology, all of these things, had no intention of doing that, and was so good at it that he did anyway.
Many people aren't aware of how strong an influence the Gnostics were on Jung and his work. He was deeply familiar with Gnostic teachings, and they go to the heart of his psychology. The Gnostics believed that above and beyond the demiurge was a higher god, the supreme godhead, which existed in undifferentiated wholeness, pure potentiality. This is known in Greek as the pleroma, meaning the fullness. Just as the Gnostics sought to return to wholeness through mystical practices that revealed the divinity within, so Jung taught that human beings should look within themselves and reconcile the sundered parts of the psyche, finding wholeness once again. And in his early years, Jung authored a book called The 7 Sermons to the Dead. This is a Gnostic text which Jung authored under the name Basilides, one of the best-known Gnostic sages. One of the books from the Nag Hammadi Library was purchased by the Jung Institute and presented to Jung in 1953 on his birthday. It's referred to as the Jung Codex. If you're interested in Jung's connections to Gnosticism, I recommend the excellent books The Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons of the Dead, and Jung and the Lost Gospels, both by Stephen A. Holler. But Jung wasn't the only towering figure from the Germanic-speaking world who emerged to bring back the gnosis. Now, there was an Austrian mystic named Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner, who was born in 1861 in today's Croatia, is another figure who came of age in the period around the Pluto-Neptune conjunctions of 1891 and 1892. He was a scholar of the German poet and scientist Goethe, who later became a theosophist and who eventually found his own esoteric movement, anthroposophy.
I think there is a Central European magical tradition or lineage that I call the Paracelsian line, that I think philosophers and mystics and various sundry professionals that we know today, like C.G. Jung, partially Nietzsche, and certainly Steiner, fall into. And they are part of the recovery of that particular way of being in the cosmos.
Steiner had a sophisticated model of evil with echoes of Gnostic thinking around the demiurge. Steiner spoke of the malign influence of not one, but 2 evil beings, which he called Lucifer and Ahriman.
Ahriman is one half of a polarity in Steiner's version of esoteric Christianity. And the other end of the polarity is Lucifer, and in the middle is Christ. And so the polarity in the Ahriman direction is towards technocracy and control and managerialism. And that literally satanic idea that transformed the 20th century with things like holocausts and now is expressed in digital IDs and digital currency and all the rest of the stuff that's in the process of being implemented. On the Luciferian end, that's pleasure-seeking and individualism and the expression in the literal opposite direction. Both are pathological when taken to the extreme. And the point that Steiner was making is that Christ is the balance in between these two. So I wouldn't necessarily call Steiner Gnostic. He was certainly an esoteric Christian, and Gnosticism is an esoteric Christianity. So that's where the overlap is.
Crucially, Steiner said that just as Jesus had visited the earth, so Ahriman would incarnate in the world after, quote, a part of the third millennium had elapsed. This suggests he might be due to appear right around now. Steiner said Ahriman would incarnate in the flesh, but many think he might prefer to take another form.
As for the arrival of Ahriman now on Earth, you have to consider whether an entity that is the expression of digital currencies and managerialism and total predictable control is going to come to Earth in the flabby body of the founder of a software company, or is this being going to incarnate as firstly the cloud and the things that we build on the cloud and have its physical expression in a way that is perfectly Ahrimanic, which is these carcinogenic telephonic devices we carry around with us that will be used to fulfill the promise of Ahriman, which is reliable connection and leveling with everyone, but also fulfill the threats of Ahriman, which we are in the process of finding out.
Steiner made some uncanny predictions about where human civilization would go in the 20th and 21st centuries.
When you want to engage with Steiner's thought, you have to work out what kind of thing Steiner was first. So what kind of universe do you live in that has room for a Rudolf Steiner to exist? I view him in that Central European lineage as some kind of mystic. So had he incarnated 600 years before, he may have become a saint or a church father, or he might have been burned. And what we have now in understanding his views and his forecasts and predictions and map of the cosmos, I think, is we have the benefit of being post-parapsychology. So I look at Steiner's predictions through a lens of remote viewing, which is to say the remote viewers evened out as a group to about 70% accuracy, which means they're approximately right. So if you look at Steiner's work through the lens of remote viewing, it is no longer a requirement for it to be perfectly accurate or you throw it out. You have a 70% accuracy. And when you grant him that leeway, Steiner's story of the, incarnation, I suppose, of Ahriman around now starts to look, again, like one of those nothing but net predictions from the car park. Like, that's actually pretty good.
And if you look around you, it should be clear that the digital systems being put in place have the potential to create a totalizing system of illusion and control. And this is once again a Gnostic vision.
Gnosticism, I think, provides a mostly useful metaphor for our relationship to technology now. So there is a temptation in a technological world to live an entirely mediated, which is to say, sort of not real reality. And sort of not real is the Gnostic view of creation, because it's not like this is an illusion. Like the demiurge did make this stuff, but it's not the profound medicinal ultimate reality. There is an invitation to a moral understanding of how and where to interact with technology here. The Gnostic impulse to flee it, I think itself can be pathological. And so we're looking at versions of that now in culture that I think are in the process of maybe causing their own problems with the rise of the grab a tradwife and run off into the woods kind of dankness, the anti-technology. And funny enough, that brings us to the almost a Steinerian polarity, because the opposite of too much Ahriman, if you go too far, is too much Lucifer. Like the solution is the balance, is the literal Christian balance that he finds in the middle of that polarity.
Gnosticism is a way of seeing the world that denies the authority of the archons. So perhaps by now you can start to see why Gnostic ideas have always been suppressed. And here there's cause to get a little nervous, because the system is unlikely to take Gnostic threats to its authority lying down. And there is historical precedent for this. As we've seen, the original Gnostics were suppressed in the 4th century. In the medieval periods, a Gnostic religion flourished among people in parts of Western Europe. These people were the Cathars, and in the 13th and 14th century, they were brutally suppressed by the Catholic Church and the French monarchy. In the extended version of this video, available for World Astrology Report members, we look at the history of the Cathar eradication and see how it connects astrologically to the current time. In 1234, the Church established the Inquisition to root out Cathars and other heretics. By 1350, all remnants of Catharism had been eradicated. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that something like this is going to happen in our current time, but we may well see similar themes playing out once again. The Cathar persecution and the founding of the Inquisition came during the last age of air, and now we're in another one. Just as the Inquisition was established to root out heretical ideas, so we see conflicts over ideas in the age of the internet. Today, of course, heresy has different names. And to some people, spiritual ideas are just a form of misinformation. And today, we no longer have inquisitors, we have algorithms and AIs, and disinformation czars instead. The internet initially promised greater freedom of expression and an escape from dogmas of the past, but more and more it's being used today to encourage conformity of thinking. It seems to have moved from a vehicle of self-expression to a control system. And so the reality is that this moment in history is pregnant with peril and promise, particularly for those with spiritual convictions. And it has a deeply Gnostic flavor. You might find that depressing or scary, but remember that it's through opposing force that strength is built. It's as if the reality of spiritual and mundane entities that work against our interests and seek to keep us blinded to spiritual reality needs to become very obvious, almost too powerful to give us the push we need to strive towards gnosis. But how should we navigate our way through these times? And what principles can we use to guide our decisions in the face of these challenges? Fortunately, teaching people how to navigate the world of spirit and the interesting times we're living through is Gordon's speciality.
Amongst the Rune Soup Premium membership this year in particular, we are exploring the points of consent and departure with what is happening as we roll into, a digital currency world, which is guaranteed that's happening. What are you going to do? Are you just going to start trading beads for bear skins with your neighbor? Where is your consent and departure from these processes? If this process starts to impact the foods that you wish to eat, are you going to consent or depart there? And how are you going to do it? So it's different for every person, but the universal advice at this juncture is this is happening, get the F over it, and find your points of consent and departure with what's going on. The two classic Rune Soup prayers are, what is mine to do? So pray for the answer to that. That's prayer number 1. And prayer number 2, which I stole from Charles Eisenstein, is may I be put to good use. So if you can find your way with those two prayers, where you consent and where you depart from what's going on will be much clearer.
So that's almost it for this episode. Thank you so much to Gordon for joining me and sharing his wisdom on the channel. You can find him, his teaching and community at runesoup.com.
If this kind of stuff is interesting, or if you want to pull on some of those additional oracular model threads, for the rest of this year amongst the Rune Soup Premium membership, we're going to be doing a 4 or 5 month course that I'm calling Time Magic. And it's my sharing of what I call my blended cycle model, which is how I get about 4 or 5 of these different things to run as a predictive system, and what is yours to do to stand in this moment. What is yours to do as a timekeeper and a day keeper for this moment as we go through this transition? Because people who are in this world of astrology, it's not just something that we look at, it's something that we feel. And And that rune soup prayer question, what is mine to do, is very alive. And if that is something that is alive for you, join us for Time Magic.
Now, if you were intrigued by the astrological ideas in this episode and want to dig into them, then I have a whole series of videos delving into the history of religion, technology, occultism, UFOs, and Rudolf Steiner, among other things. It's called New Age 2026. So I suggest you watch this video, the first in the series, which explains how the Pluto-Neptune cycle works and what it tells us about changes to faith, belief, and consciousness. Thanks, and see you next time.